Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. This is GearFest 2021, and we are about to spend some time with an amazing musician with a legendary career. This is Tom Scott. It's great to have you join us.
Thank you, Mitch. It's my pleasure to be here.
So you're, in fact, behind you there, we see some of the fruits of your career, some statues and some things on the wall there.
Yeah, there's some fruit back there, yeah. Pardon the expression, sure. Look, I've been doing this 50 years or more, and over time, if you're doing well and get accepted by people in the industry, you rack up a few things. I'm very proud of my achievements and have had a wonderful life in music.
Well, you definitely should be proud because you've accomplished so much. And in fact, as I was kind of digging into your background a little bit there, 2,000 recordings or more than 2,000 recordings and hundreds of television shows and film scores and composer, arranger, conductor, music director, podcast host, educator, on and on and on to, and of course, saxophonist as well.
I'm exhausted just listening to that.
So tell us about the early days. It appears, looking from the outside, that you kind of burst onto the scene in 1966 with some of your first recordings, and your first recording under your name came out in 1967.
Right, I know. Well, look, I got a couple of spectacular breaks, part of which was having a father who was a marvelous film composer himself. In fact, he mentored John Williams before John Williams committed to being a film composer. He was a studio pianist at first and wrote music for television and movies. Lassie, Twilight Zone, Wagon Train, many shows. My dad has over 700 credits.
Wow.
In film and television. Having him in the house all the time in a room, a converted dining room or something, playing those wonderful bitonal chords, dramatic chords on the piano. That was just part of my osmosis. It just soaked in. And then when I took up the clarinet at the age of 8, at the request of the local new school music teacher, Mrs. Todd, rest her soul, I took up the clarinet, and my dad, in addition to providing me with the very best teachers, the private teachers that I could possibly have, some of the studio musicians that he knew, he bought me a Benny Goodman record from 1938, which was 10 years before I was born, but it was a record that I absolutely flipped over. It had, Teddy Wilson, Lionel Hampton, Terry James, Gene Krupa, and of course Benny Goodman himself, who was spectacular. My father didn't teach me per se, but I admit he was always there if I had a question, which he could always answer, and that was a wonderful help. I then moved on to saxophone in junior high school. Baritone sax was the only opening in the jazz band, so my dad once again bought me a record of Jerry Mulligan, and I adored Jerry Mulligan and his music. You never get over your love for your childhood idols, and he was one of them. And I loved his big band and his writing and his playing. So musical, so lyrical, just beautiful, man. Right. Age of Steam was the name of the record. So later, as I went through high school, and by the time I graduated high school, I was already doing little gigs around, country clubs and weddings and bar mitzvahs and that sort of thing. And I went to USC with the intention of being a music major. And then I asked the critical question. I said, the deal breaker. I said, would it be possible for me to take some time maybe in a classroom or one of the rooms when there's nothing happening there, for me to kind of put together an ensemble of my own and write some music, original music, and rehearse it and have it played? And a guy looks at me and said, no, maybe when you're a senior or a graduate student. And as you could imagine, I did not take kindly to that response. So I took some general ed classes for a semester, and then a couple things happened. I had joined the Air National Guard, which is the National Guard branch of the Air Force, because the Vietnam War was at its peak. And by doing that, I was able to join the local band in Van Nuys. Or as I like to say, I guarded Van Nuys for 6 years, and I'm proud to say no one attacked the entire time. But that came along, so I had to do my basic training. And by the time I got done with that and came back, I started to work, and I didn't want to go back to school because I had to, make that decision. Gosh, do you get a degree so you have something to, as they used to say, fall back on? Maybe they still say that. Or do you just plunge in? And I was just so excited. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to give it my best shot. I could have been a teacher. I would have enjoyed it. In fact, I teach now, and I enjoy it very much. But the lure of being a professional musician in the studios was just too great.
Right.
So I jumped in, and I worked at Dante's Jazz Club, met Roger Kellaway, Dave Grusin, Howard Roberts. So I started did my first album featured as a featured soloist was an album called Spirit Feel for Pacific Jazz with the Roger Kellaway Quartet. And then the big break came when I sat in with the Oliver Nelson Big Band. Oliver, who was one of my jazz heroes from New York, moved out to L.A. to write for films and television, which he did for a while. We did a 2-week gig, and I had this feature solo on Milestones, the great arrangement that Oliver had written of Miles Davis' tune, Milestones. And I guess I must have impressed the owner, the creator of Impulse Records, Bob Thiel, who had come out to record us the last couple of nights. Because when we finished the gig, as I'm packing up on the stage, Bob Thiel walks across the floor and looks up at me and said, "Hey, kid." Now, my first reaction to that is to look around and go, "What, are you talking to me?" And he says, "How'd you like to make an album for Impulse?" And I'm like, wow. Yes, Mr. Thiel, I'd love to. So that led to my first solo recording, which that's kind of the thing that took. You asked the question a long time ago. How did I? That was the big launch pad, because that first album I did had many of the great studio musicians of that era, including Carole King, and Glenn Campbell played rhythm guitar. He was unknown at the time still. And Emil Richards, the great studio percussionist, and Jim Gordon, who unfortunately left us in a horrible situation. And Mike Melvoin, some of the busy studio players, and word started to get. I guess I did well, because word started to get out that this young kid, and I embraced jazz, but I was willing to interpret any kind of style. I don't know whether it's arrogance or what, to think that. As a musician, I can walk, at least the goal, I don't know how well I do it, but the goal is to walk in any musical situation and make it sound like it's my specialty, like it's what I do, it's what I love. I mean, I consider that the ultimate challenge. And if I can walk away from a recording session or a concert or something saying, I really did the best I could, that is victory right there.
Right. One of the aspects of that, now that you mentioned it, is, wow, Minnie Riperton, Barbra Streisand, the Beach Boys, Paul McCartney, Steely Dan. I mean, that's a pretty broad, and it goes beyond that. I mean, talk about diverse. How do you prepare yourself to do well in all those different genres and situations?
Well, of course, you've got to be fluent on your instruments. That's the first thing. And but it pays to have it to listen, be aware of the various styles of music, and I like, from my point of view, saxophone players, of course. You had the rock and roll guys, like Plas Johnson and King Curtis and Junior Walker, the more R&B type stylists, and then on the other end, you had Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley and I love them all, and then a great variety in between. As I said, Jerry Mulligan, Stan Getz, Art Pepper, a very, very underrated, great West Coast saxophone player, and a whole. I collected records, listened to pop records as well. I loved the Beatles. Loved a lot of rock and roll records, rock records, R&B records. I remember when I was driving in the Hollywood Hills, and the first time I ever heard the James Brown band play, what was it? I don't know, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, or whatever it was. Man, the feel of that thing just spoke to me. I couldn't contain my joy at hearing that.
Right.
So I guess, if, as I said, as I have said, music, great music comes in all styles, and I am attracted to great musicians, in whatever style, country, R&B, pop, jazz, of course, classical, you name it.
Right. One of the things that stands out to me when I listen to you in all those different diverse situations, whether it's your solo albums or actually on the way in to do this interview, I was listening to the first Tom Scott and the LA Express album, and the solo you did, and listen to what the man said for Paul McCartney and Wings, and the work you did on Asia and Gaucho. There's always, and I understand that saxophone is a melodic instrument, but there's always a very distinct melody that I hear in your playing. How does that happen? Do you look at the chords, or where do those melodies come from?
Well, in the beginning, yes, of course, you look at the chords, but most of it is using your ears and letting the tune kind of lead you in a direction. Part of my job going into the studio was to improvise on my own based on the style of the tune. So a producer would say, hey, here's the tune and the bridge and the chorus, and here's 8 bars of something. We want you to play a solo in there. And they usually have no idea what they want. They want me to interpret it in my own way, play what I feel, and hope for the best.
Right.
But again, I think that goes back to listening very carefully. I don't play. I'm not one of these people who walks in and goes, "Here's what I do, take it or leave it." I'm very flexible because I believe that the whole project is what's important. The audience doesn't go, "Oh, isn't Tom Scott's solo great?" They either like the tune or they don't, and I want them to like it because I contributed something that made that record just a little bit better.
Right. I totally get that. And the other aspect of improvisation is some people think of it as on-the-fly composition. Now, you're also a composer. And I'm curious, when you're in a situation like, okay, you've been hired to do the theme song for Starsky and Hutch. How do you approach that? Where does that come from to come up with a theme for a show like that?
To turn what you said around a little bit, it's improvising on paper.
Okay.
Starsky and Hutch. Well, that's a very odd story, to be honest with you. Have you got a second?
We got a second.
Okay. So I got a request from a great studio pianist named Artie Kane, who's retired now. But he, at the time, and this is in the 70s, he was dating Jack Benny's daughter. Joan Benny was her name. And Joan Benny had a daughter who was about 10 or 11, going to a very ritzy, exclusive, private school in Bel Air for girls. So Artie Kane walks up to me and says, Joan's daughter goes to a school that has career day. And I just thought it might be a good idea for you to, you do those saxophone and solo overdubs and things. And I thought they might like to find out about that. I say, sure. So I go to this private school, classroom full of girls, 10 to 12, and I kind of explained to them. I brought my saxophone. I had just done Jazz Man with Carole King, and I still had, we had reel-to-reel tape in those days. I had a reel-to-reel tape of her doing the track without me on it. So I was able to play them the tune and then, play it and play along live with it, wasn't my exact solo, but it was something similar. And I did this demonstration and went home and, forgot about it. And then, I don't know, 3 or 4 months later, I get a call from my film and TV composing agent, Al Bart. And he says, Tom, did you do something at a girls' school recently? I said, yeah. He says, well, one of the girls, her father is a producer at Spelling Goldberg Productions. And they've got a show that needs a theme. And apparently, this little girl went to her father and said, Daddy, I think this guy should write the theme. And it was me. So I took a meeting with the producer, and he said, give me a demo. I went in the studio and did 3-tune demo of tunes that I had written. The first one was, as far as I was concerned, a shoo-in. I knew already that's going to be the one. The other two I later worked into albums that so nothing was wasted. I recycled. But the first tune demo we did was with Joe Sample, um, the wonderful bass player and tenor player with the Crusaders. Wilton Felder played bass on it. And, I had great guys. I think Larry Carlton played guitar. And I can't remember who the drummer was. But in any case, that demo became the theme for years for Starsky and Hutch.
That's crazy.
And as far as how I wrote it, I think I came up with the melody first. Sometimes it's a rhythm vamp. I love writing to rhythm vamps if I think they're cool. I'll try to write around that. The answer is all different combinations. Sometimes I'll just get a flash. Oh man, that's cool. I'll write that down before I forget it. So it's not it's it's a very loose art
Right.
composition. It's very flexible.
Right. So I have to ask you about one series of albums that you did that stand out to me personally, and that's the Joni Mitchell albums, the Court and Spark and Hejira, and that whole era. There was 4 albums, I think, where you and the band backed her up. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, as no one's going to challenge me if I say Joni Mitchell is a monumental talent. Okay, her musical talent is completely instinctive. In fact, when I first met her, it was on a record that I did alone with her. That's how we first met, called For the Roses. But I just kind of thought she was a folk singer. I didn't really know. And then when I heard these tunes, I was like, I don't know. It's not. She's not a folk singer. Okay, that does not do her justice. She's
Right.
a lot more than that.
Right.
And in fact, it was impossible to define a category. What is that? I think it's the Joni Mitchell category. I tell you what, we were in the studio one time in the very beginning, and she went out to the piano to show me something, and she played like a sophisticated jazz chord. Like, actually, I call it the so what chord because it's the beginning of Miles Davis. Da da. It's that voicing, right?
Right.
And I go, oh man, that's cool. That I said, I don't know, D minor 11th, whatever I said. I named it technically, and she said, yeah, I don't know what it is. I just like the sound of it, and that's the way she wrote. And for anybody to be that good musically and just have it be completely instinctive is remarkable, I think.
Right.
And she was a joy to work with. She described our meeting as kind of a ping pong match where because she had put some backgrounds on like a section, and she did it very carefully, and I learned a lot from this. She did like 3 or 4 parts, and she'd hold a note, ah, and then they'd all vibrato just exactly the same way, like that. So I took some flutes and clarinets and doubled her in a few places, and went out of my way. I said, turn that background vocal up loud in my phones so I can match exactly all the nuances. And it's really a cool sound. And I was just blown away working with her. It was one of those lightning in a bottle experiences. It was just awesome.
It had to be amazing. It had to be
Yeah.
incredible. So one of the things that stands out to me is you're also a producer, and you've written so much music and put out so many albums under your own name and with different groups. When I listen back to some of the early music and up through the decades and the thousands of recordings, they still sound fresh. I don't hear your recording sounded dated the way that some of the others from similar eras can sound dated. How do you avoid that?
All I could tell you is lucky me. I don't know how you avoid that. I think, although if I was to, guess, I would say get the best musicians you can get, and try to create some music that has its own unique signature. I mean, it's easier said than done, of course. And at the time, I was lucky to meet and be able to work with, have them accept the calls that I put out to them to play with me, So I counted on them. Obviously, when you got like the LA Express with Joe Sample, Larry Carlton, and Max Bennett, John Guerin, it's almost at its best, it's almost like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Because there's some collective genius that happens that I could never sit at home and dream up. Okay, it's all about playing a tune for guys, and they say, oh, okay, what if I added this? What if I try this? And so it grows into something, and hopefully lasting. I mean, I certainly had no thoughts of things being timeless, but if they are, I'm grateful.
Right. So we're working our way through all your various titles here, and one of the other ones is music director. And one of the instances where you've been the music director is multiple years with the Emmy Awards and a number of other TV awards shows. That has to be an incredibly high-pressure gig.
Well, in a way it is, but the thing that relieves the pressure, okay, first of all, in a typical 3-hour award show, there are 150 music entrances.
Wow.
And that's all the awards. That's playing people on and off. That's going to commercial, coming back from commercial, main title, end title, and whatever else. There's usually a performance or two. So there's all of that, and the book is like that thick, with music for the orchestra. And but here's the good news: that all that music, of course, is prepared in advance. I would do as much of it orchestrated, all the television themes of the nominated shows. I got some orchestration help from great arrangers, Eddie Karam and some others, and so you're prepared in that way. But the other thing is, we had a rough rehearsal like 2 days before, and then a more detailed rehearsal on the Saturday, because the show is always on a Sunday night. A more detailed rehearsal on Saturday, and then a dress rehearsal on Sunday morning. So you've gone through the show 3 times before you go on the air. So any fires that needed to be put out or problems that they're going to turn up somewhere in those 3 rehearsals. So by the time you're on the air, you pretty well understand what it is.
Right. Has to be amazing, though. It has to be incredible. So
it's fun. I mean, I always used to say I love hanging it out there in front of a few million people.
So we could probably extend this interview and fill up the whole of GearFest, but we don't have that much time, unfortunately. But there are 2 other things that I want to talk to you about, and the first is that
Sure.
is your podcast. Tell us about that.
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, one of the things that happened during COVID was, like everybody else, I found myself with a lot of spare time. And my dear friend, who actually is the head of the Steinhardt School at New York University, Steinhardt School of Music. But during COVID, I had done some YouTube videos I did one about talking about John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, the Blues Brothers. I did one talking about George Harrison, a couple other people. And he said, Tom, you have a good voice for broadcasting, which I'd been told before, but I never pursued it. He said, you should be doing podcasts. Podcasts are really happening these days. Okay. He said, you have some friends in the business, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I do. And so we started doing these podcasts, and the general tone of them is that I'm not so anxious to talk about what they're doing right now, promoting something. I'm more interested, and I think people generally are more interested in the story. What makes a person just figuring out what they want to do, to that something, that spark, whether it's a person or an event or something that makes them go, I want to do this. And then how do they get there? How they achieve success in that area? Those are the areas that really interest me. And so far, I've done. We've released about 15 of them so far, but I've done 40 so far, with everyone from Billy Bob Thornton, Angelica Houston, Keb Mo, Ray Parker, Sheila E., Vanessa Williams. I mean, a real wide swath of people. It's Tom Scott's Podcast Express. You can get it anywhere you get your podcasts, or on my website, tomscottmusic.com.
So one other thing we need to talk about, our friends at Roland facilitated you being here at GearFest with us, and we're very grateful to them. And I see over your right shoulder there the instrument that ties you to Roland these days. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah, there is something over there. Let's see what it is, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this, let me get back so you can see it. This is the Roland AE30 Aerophone Pro, and it is the latest and most advanced of the family of wind synthesizers. Okay, I played I played one back in the 70s called the Lyricon. In fact, right there is an ad uh, with my face from 1974 on there for Lyricon, because I became fascinated with wind synthesizers and the possibilities that they provided. Um, and did several recordings. I played that wind synthesizer on Billie Jean. Just a few little ear candy things, we call them, little bits of music, and several other things. So, but the Lyricon unfortunately had a short life, because the gentleman who had created it passed on, and the factory did not go any further. I guess it was too much of a minority instrument to be profitable. I don't really know all the details, but in any case, the Aerophone is now the by far the most exciting advance in wind synth technology. It has 600 onboard sounds. Okay, unbelievable that they can fit all that in that package, and it's just a whole lot of fun. I've rediscovered my joy for playing the wind synth, and it adds, for obviously the most interested people would be people who already play wind instruments, saxophone players, clarinet players, and like. Um, and I will tell you that it is a joy to be able to expand your palette musically, and it's a great way to expand your musical possibilities for wind players like myself.
That's an incredible instrument. I mean, it's so far advanced beyond, you mentioned the Lyricon and some of the other electronic wind instruments where you had to have separate rack synthesizers and all those
Yes,
kind of things that you had to tie in. This is much more of an instrument that you can actually play, and so a lot of credit to Roland for developing that.
that's absolutely true. I just found out about it, within the last few months, and I was so shocked that I didn't know anything about it, and what a surprise! And very shortly, they partnered with me, sent me one, and I'm all into it.
That's awesome. After your career and the amazing body of work you've created, what keeps you fresh and inspired today?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. You know what? You have to, it's an attitude. It's all attitude. You have to constantly renew, because it's so easy to fall into the thing of, well, I've done, in my case, I've done whatever it is, 35 records, and played on whatever 2,000 others. I don't have any more to say. I'd say, nothing. No, it's how do you express yourself? It's because great music is not only just notes, but it's expression and coming up with new ways and exploring your passions through music. And that's a wonderful discovery that I hope to keep fresh for as long as I'm on the planet.
Well, that leads me very nicely into my final question for you, which is a question I always ask when I have a master musician here, and of course, someone like yourself who's worked with virtually every master musician on the planet, and that is, what makes a great artist?
Um, well, talent, um, drive, commitment to excellence. Uh, because look, obviously there's a lot of competition out there, and if you have the ability, that's good. But moreover, you've got to drive yourself. You've got to every day get up and say, how can I get better? How can I improve myself? What can I do to advance my abilities in music? Without that drive, I would suggest, an alternate pursuit. I mean, music can be great as recreation, as an avocation, but to be a professional musician, you got to really push yourself.
Absolutely. Tom, thanks so much for sharing so much time with us, being so generous with your wisdom and experience. And man, again, congratulations on a tremendous career and what an amazing body of work. And I can't wait to see what's up next.
Me too. Thank you, Mitch, for your time. I appreciate it very much.
My
And
pleasure.
thanks to Sweetwater as well.
Well, thank you. And again, thanks for joining us here at GearFest. And thank you for joining me here. I've been with Tom Scott. What an amazing career, and what a treat to spend some time with him. Enjoy the rest of GearFest. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.